right, so a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Try and keep those cell phones quiet during the presentation. And the second thing is if you could please fill out the survey that you get towards the end of the talk. You'll get it via email. Everybody would really appreciate it. So thank you. Now, to provide some context, what's my background? So I've been working in games for a while. I've shipped a variety of different games. Like many people, started out in one role, kind of transitioned to others. So starting with gameplay engineering, and then doing design work, and then moving into a broader design role that then encompassed more UX. And so for the more recent titles, I've been a lot more heavily involved in that particular aspect of design. And today we're going to talk specifically about the UX for Halo Wars 2. So as a starting point, it's good to think about what the constraints are for any given game that you work on. And Halo Wars 2 is an RTS. It's a sequel to a game that came out about 10 years ago. And whenever we bring a new title to the Halo franchise, we always have to think about what these kinds of constraints are going to be. So the first one of these here is expectations, right? So 15 years of history for this franchise makes for a lot of passionate fans, a lot of features that have evolved over time, and making sure that every game that we build delivers on the expectation of those fans. There's also our own internal team expectations, though, which is how do we move the franchise forward? What do we bring that's new, that's exciting, that pushes the boundaries of modern UX design? Another unique thing about Halo Wars 2 that's different from the original game is that we wanted to take it to more than one platform. So Halo Wars 1 was designed to be a console-specific RTS, and a lot of the UX was built with console in mind to be a good experience for that particular platform. Not only did we want to bring it to these two platforms, we also wanted to enable the ability to cross-play with these two platforms. And there's a lot of considerations we had to make in terms of how we modify what that core game is and what the right experience for it is. The next one here is team. So there are a number of folks at 343 that have worked on the Halo titles, number of Halo titles, but there's also new people that come on board. And we also had the good fortune to partner with Creative Assembly in the development of this title. And that was a lot of learning for all of us to work together basically on what our design process would be together and then how we continue to evolve this franchise together, and a lot of great debate around what the core pieces of that franchise to carry forward are. And finally, it's something that we all deal with, but it's a pretty important consideration in the way that we design anything, which is just time is always a constraint. And I used to think that once upon a time, perhaps, that there was a bad design that was implemented, and who knew what reason it was in any given particular title. And over time, I've come to appreciate that for a variety of reasons, whether it's the amount of time that you may spend working on a feature, spending too much time on it, or not keeping in mind when the project needs to be shipped, this is a constraint that basically forces us, in some cases, to make imperfect decisions. So from these constraints, we also think about what our UX vision pillars are going to be for the game. So for Halo Wars 2, there's several here that we're going to cover. And we're going to talk about how these vision pillars inform the decisions we made around specific areas of building this game. So the first one is, how do we instill the feel of Halo into the titles that we build? And there's a lot of different components that go into this, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that we really want to highlight the things that people expect out of the franchise, get them to feel as they come into the game that it's a good experience, that it's something familiar, and Halo Wars 2 is no exception in that regard. We want to build an RTS for everyone. So RTS has been around for a long time, and Halo Wars did a lot of work to bring in a new audience of players that maybe were intimidated by the RTS before, but even still, matches could last for a long time. And we heard feedback from folks that basically they wanted a way to get in, they really wanted to learn how to play the game, but they were intimidated by the economy or the base building or just some of the other features of RTS. So we wanted to bring in a new mode, a new way to play this game that would help people to come in and feel like they had a good entry point. The next one here is being approachable and deep. And this specifically applies to the way we thought about this new mode, which is our new Blitz mode, basically. And it's a new mode where it's a hybrid of a card strategy game and the RTS genre. It's played in 5 to 7 minute chunks. We wanted to make sure this appealed not just to new casual players, but also to players that would get into it for the long run and play competitively, play in tournaments, make sure that this particular mode had legs. It's also expected that for any given Halo title, that we offer a great multiplayer experience. And this has everything to do with how you join up with your friends, how you matchmake, and then the options that are offered to you when you play custom games, all the way to the controls and the feel of the game from moment to moment. And once again, it's something that we need to think about for each of these games independently. And the final point here is to be a platform showcase. So now that we are on these two platforms, Xbox and PC, we want to deliver an experience that feels great for folks that are coming in from both the console side and from the PC side. So let's talk a little bit about what the Halo feel encompasses. So when you look at Halo titles, it's something that you want to feel from the moment you launch the game, right? It establishes the mood, creates a sense of wonder, it brings you deeper into the universe, it makes you curious about the franchise. We offer you fantastic worlds, and we want to make sure that all players feel like they're taken on this journey from the moment they start to each of the different areas of the game that they might explore. So, as they go through the campaign, they're starting to think about what story elements are there, what the characters are, what options are available for them to customize their multiplayer experience. We want to bring forward a lot of these memorable characters and the heroes, and to let you wonder about them and to think about them in how it relates to the story, and to get you to come back. And to also think about how you can customize your experience and bring yourself into these games. And importantly, we've built up a lot of history here, and we want to make sure that things feel familiar. So we spend a lot of time going back and creating style guides and flows that we can apply for each game. And it's not always the same necessarily from game to game, but the ideas remain and the consistency remains. It's something that feels comfortable from the moment you get in and you start playing. So as it applies to Halo Wars 2, Halo Wars 2 is unique in that it's an RTS, and so a lot of the game is played from a fairly zoomed out perspective. You don't necessarily get a close-up view of these characters. So one of the cool things that we really wanted to get into that initial experience, and Creative Assembly had spent a lot of time building a lot of detail around these characters and vehicles and units, and you just don't get a good perspective on them while you're fighting and playing the game. So as you come into these menus for the first time, you'll see these dioramas where the camera pans around these characters, it zooms in on them, and it really gives you a good sense of what they look like, and it makes you wonder about, okay, cool, there's this deeper element to what's here, even though I can't necessarily see it from the way that I'm playing the game normally. We also want to make you wonder about what's going on in the campaign and what that experience feels like. So when you switch over to this area of the game, again, you're presented with the holo table of the Ark, which is an important place where a lot of events for Halo Wars 2 take place. And once again, you'll see it from different angles. It'll pan around. It's an important unifying element throughout the cinematics because the characters will frequently talk about how they're going to different places here and what they're doing. And by bringing this forward, we just create more of that sense of intrigue around what the campaign has to offer. And finally, we're delivering a new mode here with Blitz. And this mode specifically, it's a card-based RTS hybrid. And there's a lot of work that went into illustrating these cards and making them feel very unique. And when I first saw the screen, I was really excited because I played a lot of physical card games. And I don't know if you've ever seen like an uncut sheet of cards, but it's a really cool thing to behold. And these particular menus, as you get in, you can basically see a lot of these illustrations put together on posters that you pan between different sections of that poster, and it brings you into what it feels like to have that card game there, and it lets you know that it's a very distinct and unique area of the game. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually went about creating that RTS for everyone, and specifically with respect to the way we iterated on the Blitz mode specifically. So as I mentioned, it's a hybrid of a card game and an RTS. The matches are meant to be 5 to 7 minutes long. We want to make sure that there's a good focus on core RTS combat and basically map control, fighting for resources, but not having to deal with a lot of that early game experience of how you build up your economy and upgrade your tiers and knowing the tech tree and everything. So early on, we wanted to establish some pillars around what this mode would entail. And we had some initial challenges because we wanted to make sure that we had the right controls, the right deck size, hand size, things played well on multiple platforms, and it felt like a card game. So an early version of this that we were looking at was being able to deploy cards at the position of the cursor with the directional pad, basically. This was fast, But as you can see, the cards themselves, they would have been small. We've had different scales of this, but ultimately they didn't represent the same type of card throughout the experience, right? So it's just hard to see the details there. The deployment was fast. You don't really hold cards this way, so it didn't have that card game feel. And they took up a fair bit of space in the HUD. So we started to think a little bit more about, okay, can we basically take more elements of a traditional card game and bring that in, and then maybe drop this down a bit in the HUD, and maybe this would help us accomplish more of our goals. And so we did this basically card hand fan down the bottom. You can see the cards are now bigger. They're more legible. Still not perfect, though, because you do have some overlapping elements. Selection's not entirely clear, but we're starting to get a little bit closer into something that feels like it fits in naturally with the way the game plays. And so for our final solution, we went with a 4-card hand. We laid them out horizontally, dropped them a bit down in the HUD. But all the core components of the cards, as you can see, are fairly legible. You can see the cost, the type, the name, and illustration. And if you want to go deep and then deploy these cards, get a little more information on them with just a click of the mouse or a pull of the trigger, you get the expanded card view. And in here, you've got a very clear, large card right in your face there. The selection elements are clear. And it feels natural. It feels like a card game. It works well on PC and console because it's just a couple of button presses or a couple of clicks away. And it felt like we'd hit the right sort of the right look for what we were going for here. Now, thinking about this some more, though, remember we wanted to be approachable for new players, but then also deep for players that want to play competitively. And we had a lot of assumptions coming in about what it meant to be a card game, right? So typically for a lot of card games, you've got fairly large deck sizes, and you want to have all these really interesting choices about what you can pull in and how you can play those cards. And when we start to think about this from the context of being on console and having a deck editor, deck view, it starts to get fairly busy. So ultimately, you've got some way of representing your deck and the card library on the same screen, and you can move cards back and forth, and there's variations on this for different console card games. But it's also something that is hard to keep in your head all the time, right? If you look off to the sides, you're going to notice that you can't quite see everything that's in your deck. The duplicate, the ways they're represented, it's not always obvious, and then obviously you're only seeing a slice of your card library. And on top of that, there's just a lot of buttons here. So we changed our frame of reference. We thought, well, what if we went to a model where the decks themselves are only 12 cards, and the card could be represented in its entirety on the screen in that deck view, or the deck view that's there. You basically can snapshot this, share it easily with your friends, and the way we get around the choices in terms of making sure that there's depth in the choices is we only allow one of any given card in the deck. And so you still have to make a lot of interesting choices around what type of units you bring, the various costs that they bring, and how that shapes your deck. And the leaders themselves add a twist to it because they have their own unique sort of play styles that affect how you build these decks. Now, when we go to look at how we do deck editing, again, it's a fairly similar presentation, except this time now we've put the actual deck on the left side of the screen. We've put the rest of the library on the right. And you can quickly and easily get your cards in and out of your deck with a single button press or a single click. One adds, one removes. It feels pretty natural. You can't obviously see your whole library at a time, but you can page through it fairly quickly. And it felt like we were able to solve a lot of these problems just really by thinking about this in kind of a different way. And there's still a good bit of deck variety, and the leaders provide the variety, and all those things work pretty well together. So when we think about our next pillar, it's really delivering on a great multiplayer experience. And this means many things, right? It means how you're able to play with your friends and matchmake, what you can do for your custom games, and then also how we bring depth into the multiplayer experience. And for Halo Wars 2 specifically, we wanted to go even deeper than the original game in terms of how you differentiate your armies. So we had this notion that we wanted to bring in these leader command trees, something where if we play the same leader, for example, I may focus on faster moving units that can capture points quickly and heal themselves, and you may choose to focus more on long range attacks, kind of AoEs, in a more aggressive style of play. And as we were building this out, we felt like we were bringing in the depth, but there was a concern that we had as a team, and then also something that we wanted to see through our beta, which is, does this provide a bit too much of a jarring context switch for a real-time strategy game? Is there too heavy of a mental load for this? And it came to be that we're pretty split amongst the team. During the beta, the feedback pretty much reinforced this notion. And the way that you deploy these leader powers is, in the game, you basically pull the trigger and you get a radial menu that allows you to actually activate these powers and then target where they go off. We wanted to figure out, could we potentially merge these two concepts together? So as we started to think about changing it, we started to think, okay, how can we merge the depth of this command tree into this radial menu? And as you could see, kind of in our initial pass, there's a lot to explain here. There's levels, there's the differences between the lock state, unlock state, how those powers change over time, and there's a lot of things to parse here. It's also it's something you don't get a good sense of the larger meta level of what your leader power state is. And you have to basically walk the wheel in order to really get a good sense of what exactly is happening. So when we got to our final version, we did a bit more work in terms of pulling up those levels of those powers. You can see the notches on the edge. They're a little subtle, but you can see at a glance effectively what levels are locked, what levels are unlocked, and where you've invested in. The tree itself unlocks in quadrants, so as you spend points, the next quadrant moves. You move into the next quadrant, you can use powers there. And we actually removed a bunch of the text here. And the thought was that players would organically discover basically what the differences of these powers are as you play the game more, you read about it, you learn strategies. And it turned out to be the case that this ended up being a fairly good trade-off in the sense that it was quick and easy to access. Again, you can get in here, open this menu, upgrade powers, change them very quickly. You lose some sense of that larger sense of progression, but overall, the speed and ease of use made these powers really a core piece of the multiplayer experience. And we do see a good variety in terms of how players use these powers amongst their leaders throughout the game. So this is something where we felt like some things were lost, but we also gained some things, and ultimately this turned out to be a reasonably good solution. Now, the last one I want to talk about here is being a platform showcase. So as I mentioned, we're trying to be a great Xbox title, be a great PC title, and really satisfy people that are core gamers in both of those platforms. Now, in the original Halo Wars, one of the cool features of how the leader powers were used is the fact that when you were bringing these up, you would have this targeting reticle come in. And the screen dims, it goes into this scope view. It feels very Halo. It looks like almost like a sniper scope. And it works really great on the controller. So before we shipped Halo Wars 2, we actually created Halo Wars Definitive Edition, ported it to PC, and tried to bring over these powers in a way that felt good for PC and mouse controls. And it turned out these ended up being a lot harder to implement on the PC than we expected. You can kind of think about it in some different ways. So for example, without the cursor here, your normal PC cursor, you get a little bit lost in terms of what you're targeting. It also never quite felt responsive enough, even if we mapped it to the mouse in a way that we thought made sense. If we tried to leave the main PC cursor up, then you'd have this like double cursor thing going on. And if we kind of got rid of the overlay, then it just didn't really have that same level of anticipation and excitement of deploying these powers. So ultimately, for Halo Wars 2, we moved to a model where the reticles are more friendly for both platforms. And they look great. The powers themselves look fantastic once they're deployed, a lot of cool effects and explosions. It's hard to deny, though, that some of that anticipation of using those powers and that transition, it's definitely missing, right? So it doesn't feel quite as exciting for that initial part of the power deployment there, but at the same time, the game runs cross-platform. A lot of folks are enjoying it that way. It feels fair because you have the same targeting mechanisms for both games, both versions of the game. And one of our main requests that we get from our community is for more cross-play. So at the end of the day, this is also another trade-off where, while it feels like something was lost, we gained something else. So as we think about the various takeaways from the game and what this iterative process brought us, here's a few things that we would probably take from one game to another. So the first one here is know your core, right? And so for us, yes, we've got a lot of history in terms of what the franchise is, but how that applies to each game is a bit unique. And it's important for us to make sure that we're constantly reevaluating what that means, updating our internal documentation and specs for that, and really just thinking about how it applies to that new title, and how we take what we've learned and apply it in new ways for new modes and new ways to play the game. As I mentioned, again, with our assumptions around the Blitz mode, it's really rethinking our frame of reference. So sometimes we might have a tendency as designers to kind of spin on something for a long time because we feel like there's a better solution that's available. And for us, this was a key piece of, again, thinking about the deck sizes for Blitz, where really just thinking about the deck size in a different way and depth in a different way and how we make those choices, it simplified a lot of our design around how we build out the UI for those pieces of that game. And finally, embrace trade-offs. So as I mentioned, we had to move from being a console title to a multi-platform cross-play title. And while it's true that we did lose some elements of what maybe would have been great to have for a native implementation in each of those platforms, our community continues to play with each other in these different platforms. They enjoy it. Some of our best players are actually still on console today, even in a PC console cross-play world. And they continue to ask for more ways to play, more multiplayer playlists. So at the end of the day, while there are some trade-offs in terms of the aesthetic and the anticipation of those powers and things like that, those are probably things that the upside of it being that we have this cross-play audience is something we didn't anticipate in terms of the demand for it. So that's been really great to see. And that's it. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, please feel free to step up to a microphone. If you want to ask me via email, there you go. And welcome what's there. Please fill out your surveys as well. Thank you. Okay. Oh, no, someone's got a question. Yes?
Yeah. Adrian here. Thank you for the talk. Really useful. When do you know it's enough searching for a solution and it's time to embrace the trade-off?
So the question was, when do you know you've iterated enough to basically get to your solution? And again, that gets back to the knowing your core, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's really just about, for any given game, right? What is it that's unique about it? What's your hook? And then how does that apply to whatever particular thing that you're thinking about? The other piece that, like I said, is just making sure that you're allocating enough time, down the road, because I think you always end up paying later for things that you end up spending too much time earlier on. So generally speaking, I think you're going to find your solutions faster for things that are working. And sometimes it's definitely worth it to pursue those things that will take you a while to get to. But really just knowing your core and knowing how you parse out that time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks for the talk. And I was just curious, a lot of your solutions up there went back and forth between making a trade-off in the direction of gameplay or in the direction of UI. And I was just wondering if you had any process for figuring out, okay, so the solution here rests in changing the UI, like with the cards, where they go. But then there was also a piece of that was like, we're changing the hand size, which has implications on gameplay.
Yeah, and that's why I said, I think that's why I kind of encourage the thinking about the frame of reference, because like I said, you could have solved that problem from a UI perspective. And what we were finding is solving some of these challenges from a UI perspective was taking a lot of cycles. And so that's where it came back to, does it really need to be this kind of gameplay? Are there other models, other games, other platforms where maybe card games have smaller hand sizes or smaller deck sizes that we could look at? So that's why it's great to just have kind of build up this pool of knowledge of the different genres and then figure out, can you pivot, based on the gameplay or the UI? So I don't know that there's a clear answer in any one case, but I think it's really on a case-by-case basis. And that just gets back to that point of if you feel like you're spending a lot of time on something, try to look at it from a completely different angle.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, hello. That's the mic.
There you go.
Oh,
Great
sure.
talk. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have one question.
Yeah.
What was the biggest UX design challenge you encountered on Halo Wars 2 and or Blitz that surprised you and you didn't think it would be such a great challenge?
So the question is, what was the biggest UX challenge we had that surprised us that we didn't anticipate? To be honest, like, I mean, I think it was just really the multi-platform, how it impacted the UX, because we really took for granted how much of the original game was designed for console in ways that we didn't anticipate. Like I said, the powers are a really good example of that, because you figure normally for RTS you're coming in and it's going to be something that naturally fits to a PC experience. We found we had to do a lot of work actually to get the PC experience up to where PC players played it as. So I think that was probably one of the harder pieces, was maintaining what was great about that experience on console, but then coming back to PC and making it appeal to players that play a lot there.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Oh, got another one?
No,
All right.
me? Okay.
Yeah.
So going on with this PC and console,
Yeah.
do you had any problems in balancing? Do you had a moment that felt that it was easier on PC or it was easier on console? Because you said about crossplay,
Yep.
so it's like naturally you want to have it balanced.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is, how is balance affected by basically being on PC and Xbox and enabling crossplay? And certainly, I think there are certain aspects of the game that we saw early on in playtesting where for actions per minute, PC players could have some advantages. As I mentioned, though, we look at our balance data across the game, and still, I think actually like a chunk of our best players still play on console. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the core gameplay. It doesn't require maybe the same amount of actions as a PC game RTS with much larger army sizes or a lot more micromanagement. So there's a lot of aspects of the gameplay with the way the units work and their powers that balances that out, because it's more about timing and positioning and other things that you can control reasonably well on both console and PC. Yep.
What was the size of your UX team on the project? Like one designer, two?
That's such a hard question to answer, because as I mentioned, part of the point of what I was explaining with my background, like every time I've worked on UX for a game, that UX team has been a very different kind of thing, and it's typically a team of specialists. And if I were to really think about it, like there's a lot of folks within 343 and a lot of folks within Creative Assembly that are specialists in different areas. So like if I had to put a number on it, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 people, I guess, roughly. But again, it's a hard question to answer because I probably don't even appreciate, in some ways, the contributions that some people would have made to what that is. It's not a traditional UX structure, and I don't think any of the projects we work on really are in that sense. But it's really just bringing in a bunch of these different kind of subject matter experts. So, yeah. Good? Okay. Thank you.